Hello everybody, my name is Mustafa Good. I'm 37-engineering student. This is our embedded system course project, Smart Attendance. Our team name is Soda3 من Kotr embedded. My team colleagues are Abdulrahman Hamahmi, Amjad Mashal, and Abdullah Khalid. Now let me give you an overview about our project. We use Arduino Mega board for our project and some hardware components. These components are RFID reader, LCD, smoke detector, and buzzer. Because the door is closed by default, we have smoke sensor detector to detect if there is a fire in the class and open the door for the students to leave. We have also an LCD to display the number of the students currently in the class. We also use a buzzer to simulate the fire alarm. Teammate will explain some code to you.
Hello, my name is Amjad Mashal. I'll be explaining part of the code of the project we implemented for the embedded course to you. I start by explaining the teacher class, which we have defined to be a reference for the teachers entering the classes. The teacher class has multiple attributes. It starts by the RFID, which stores the RFID recorder for the teachers. Basically, we use this ID to differentiate between teachers and students or unauthorized people. We use the unique ID as an internal reference for the ID of the teacher itself. And this is the constructor we have defined for the teacher, where we create a new teacher with a specific unique ID, the default value is 0, and a unique RFID. The way we had to set the default values to null and 0, or basically some values, is because we're using new to create the class somewhere underneath. And this really doesn't work if the constructor doesn't have default values. We move on to the student class, where we have defined the RFID and unique ID as well, but we also have defined the start time, time in class, and in-class variables. We use these to be able to store the time a student has spent in a class and the time they exit. This is because when a student re-enters the class, we basically save the time they have already spent in class in the time in class variable. And of course, the in-class boolean we store so that we are able to increase the time the student has spent in class if they are in class, or basically just ignore the fact that they are outside the class if they are not. But we need to store that information somewhere, and that's why we define the boolean. We have a constructor here as well, as usual, and we have defined a method called leave, so that we can call it on a student, and if the student leaves, we set the in-class value to false, and we increase the time spent in class, so that later we can basically reset the start time without affecting the process. We move on to defining the variables we have, such that the current teacher, the start of the class, the green LED, and so on and so forth. This part will be more extensively explained by MicroLead, but I'll move on to explain the initialization of the variables. The initialization takes care of initializing the RFIDs for the students and teachers. Each RFID consists of 4 bytes, each is holding a certain number basically. Here we're storing it in decimal, but when we received it from the reader it was in hex. But it doesn't make much of a difference, it's the same anyway. So here we set the character list, the unsigned character list, which is basically 1 byte each, so that we can set the properties for the teacher. Same goes for multiple teachers, so we have 2 teachers here, teacher 0 and teacher 1, each with their own RFIDs, and the same for the students. The way we have obtained these values is by checking the RFIDs values from the RFIDs we have obtained ourselves. So these are hard-coded and they are predefined. We also have a couple of more functions. One basically returns the teacher for ID, to returns a teacher object for a specific unique ID. It searches through the teachers and returns that object. And the same for student, it also searches through the students and returns this object according to the unique ID defined for the student.
Hello, I am Abdulrahman Hamahmi, and I'm gonna explain the main algorithm to you. For the LCD, we start with 16 columns and 2 rows. We print initially students in class, and we set the bin mode for each of the output or inputs we have. And we write a low to the green LED that represents the door is open, and a high to the red LED that represents that the door is closed. We also set the serial output with the baud rate of 9600, and we start the SPI that the serial bus is. We start the MFRC 522, that is the RFID we have, and we initialize the IDs. We set up the database we have, like my colleague explained, and finally we set the students in class to be 0. Loop body, we implement our main algorithm. We first check for the smoke sensor reading. If it detects smokes, that means there is a fire, so we set the buzzer to high to represent the fire alarm. And we tell the students to leave, and we initialize all our variables. If there is no fire, we continue with our attendance procedure. We check if there is a card present on the RFID. If there is a card present, we check if this card is valid or not. If it is a valid, we search our teacher database for that card. If it is a teacher and there is no teacher in class, that means that this teacher will enter the class and the class will start. We open the door for 3 seconds so the teacher could enter. If there is already a teacher in class, we check if this teacher is the current teacher or not. If it is the current teacher, that means this teacher will leave. So we calculate the attendance for each student and we print it to the serial output. If this teacher is not the current teacher in class, we cannot let that teacher enter the class.
Hello, it's Mustafa Good again. I'm going to explain some code. If it is not a teacher, we enter else port. Then it is student. And if it's student, we check if the student is leaving or entering. Okay. If the student is not in the class, then the student is entering. So we increment the number of students in the class and set the start time for the student by the current time. If the student is not entering, then he is leaving. So we decrement the number of the students in the class, and the student leaves the class. In both cases, we change the status of the student either he is in the class or not by changing the Boolean value, and open the door for 3 seconds. When the teacher leaves the class, we set the value of time of leave as the end of the class, and then loop on the students currently in the class and set the leave time for each student by the time of leave of the teacher. And then we apply a mathematical operation using the start time of the student, the start time of the student, and the start time of the class, and the time of leave to calculate the attendance period of the student. If the student's attendance period is more than 75% from the actual period of the class, then the student marked as attended. Else he is marked as absent. Thank you.
My name is Abdullah Khaled, and I'm going to explain the hardware aspect part of this project. Now, the LCD is used to display the number of students, or in case if there is a fire, it displays a fire text to warn the students. So how does the LCD work? We connect about 10 pins to the LCD. We have the power pin, we have the ground pin, and we have a pin that controls the contrast of the screen in compared to the text area. We have a read-write pin that tells whether we want to read from the LCD or write on the LCD. We have an enable pin that enables either the read or the write. And we have now 8 pins for the data. But we only use 4 pins out of these 8 data because we use the mode that only uses these 4 pins. There are 2 modes that use either the low pins or the high pins. We also have 2 unnecessary pins here that connects to lighten the LED over here, the ground and the voltage. This component is the RFID reader, which reads designated ID on cards to notify the Arduino that there is someone who logged in. When it logs in, it lights up this lamp, which means that the door opened for this person. And then it lights red, which means that the door closed after he entered.